Oh, thank you, thank you. My name is Don Manzullo. I'm the president and CEO of the Korea Economic Institute of America, and it's a real joy to welcome you here this morning. This is going to be a pretty lively panel, so we expect a lot of statements that will evoke all types of thoughts going on in the minds of our audience. During the beginning of the Reagan administration, there was a saying, personnel is policy. With the rare confluence of events over the past year or so, all the nations of Northeast Asia have seen a transition in leadership. Some leaders have returned to power, but the nation they previously ruled has changed. Even with the re-election of President Obama in the United States, many of the key policymakers who deal with Northeast Asia as part of their portfolio have changed, including those who serve in Congress. Will this changing of the guard prove the saying that personnel is policy? Does a new leader justify expectations of change in the region? Or will long-standing national interests trump efforts at personal diplomacy to change the dynamics of the region? The aim of today's roundtable discussion, I guess it's round, is to determine whether or not there are any real changes to policy in Northeast Asia in light of the leadership transitions in China, Japan, the two Koreas, and the United States. We're privileged to have with us today 5 foremost experts on China, Japan, North and South Korea to discuss this matter in depth. You all have the detailed bios in front of you. First, we have Rudiger Frank, professor of East Asian Economy and Society and head of the Department of East Asian Studies at the University of Vienna. That's Vienna, Austria, not the stop at the end of the Orange Line on the metro here in Washington. He's also adjunct professor at Kyungam University, our co-host of today's event. He also has the distinction of spending 1 semester as a language student at Kim Il-sung University in Pyongyang. Second is Alan Romberg, who's the director of the East Asia program at the Stimson Center. He spent 20 years as a U.S. Foreign Service officer and served in various capacities dealing with East Asia, including serving as a staff member at the National Security Council for China. Next, we have Dr. In-hui Park, associate professor of the Division of International Studies at Ewha Women's University in Seoul, South Korea. He is also a member of the advisory committees to the Ministries of National Defense, Foreign Affairs, and Unification. Of note, Dr. Park received his PhD from Northwestern University, located in my home state of Illinois. I would expect him to speak with an Illinois accent. Fourth is Scott Snyder, Senior Fellow for Korea Studies and Director of the Program on U.S.-Korea Policy at the Council on Foreign Relations. He's the author and editor of numerous book chapters on aspects of Korean politics and foreign policy and Asian regionalism. Last but not least is Dr. Junya Nishino, who's an associate professor at the Department of Political Science, Faculty of Law and Politics at Keio University in Tokyo, Japan. Previously, he served as an expert on Korea at the Japanese Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So here's the way the program will run. Each of the presenters will have about up to 7 minutes to give a presentation. If you start to exceed the 7 minutes, I will tap my pen, I will hem-haw. If you get too long, I will even stand up and come over here and say, it's time to sit down. And then after that, I'll ask a few questions, and then we'll open up to the audience. So first we're going to have is, our first speaker is Frank Rudiger. Frank?
Well, thank you very much. I'm also going to say good morning. You don't have to reply. It's my great pleasure to be here at an event hosted by 2 institutions that I've been working with for a long time, IFES and Woodrow Wilson Center. In a way, the Wilson Center had been actually at the beginning of my academic career. It inspired me to do research in archives in East Germany on North Korea, and therefore it's a very special moment for me to be here. I have to correct you, sir. I negotiated 10 minutes for my presentation. I will try to stick to that. Therefore, without further ado, I think I should perhaps start because we're already behind in time. Before I start showing you pictures of North Korea, this is basically what I'm going to do today. I should say that I am, of course, aware of the situation. I am, of course, aware of all the things that Ambassador Davies had said before, human rights violations, bellicose behavior, chronic food shortage, etc., etc. Having worked on North Korea for almost a quarter of a century, it's impossible not to be aware of these things. So even though I'm not mentioning them today, of course, I'm aware of them. So what I'm going to do is not to present to you a different reality in North Korea. I'm going to talk about another side of reality in North Korea, which is quite complex. And I think it goes beyond what we usually see in our media. Why is that important? If you want to draw a policy on North Korea that works, and I don't think we have been too successful in the past decades with that, although we do have pressing issues. If you want to create a policy that works, you have to understand what's really going on. And North Korea is a big country. It's 25 million people. It's a complex society, and we better understand what's going on there in all its very facets and details. Okay, so that was my disclaimer, and now let's have a look at what's going on. People in North Korea, they have brains, they have eyes, they walk around, they keep their eyes and ears open, and they see things. So among the things that they see are cars. This is how public transportation in Pyongyang would have looked like until very recently. Each star stands for 50,000 kilometers that this vehicle has traveled. So that's 1.5 million kilometers. And this is how these things have been looking like for 20, 30 years or something. This is how it looks like today. There's a new joint venture company near Pyongyang building those new buses, which now simply look better. I'm not talking about the implications of that. I don't have time for this. Just imagine you are North Korean, and yesterday things looked like this, and now they look like that. That's not a Mercedes. I'm German, I'm qualified to know that. It's a Romanian Dacia, pretty rusty. I hope you can see that, yeah. That's a photo I took in '91 when I was a student there. This is a car produced in North Korea. An SUV in a joint venture with Pyeonghwa Motors of the Unification Church of South Korea. So this is what North Koreans see today, yesterday, today. Typical picture, you've seen many of those: empty streets, traffic lady, flower of Pyongyang regulating a traffic that doesn't exist. This is how it looks like today. And I have seen traffic jams and everything. I should have mentioned that I've been to North Korea 3 times under Kim Jong-un. Last year in April, during the missile-rocket launch, again in September last year, and most recently 4 weeks ago in early May of this year. This is the Yugyong Hotel, or Baekong Ochung as they call it in North Korea, a 105-story building. A big disgrace to the regime for 20 years. It was looking like that, unfinished. This is how it looks like today. Thanks to help by an Egyptian company called Orascom that is also running the mobile phone network, but all that doesn't matter. You're a North Korean, you live in Pyongyang, you've seen that for 20 years, now you see this. What do you think? Yeah, Mansudae Apartments opened last year. Kim Il-sung on Mansudae Hill. Sure, we know that. Look at the gentleman. No glasses, no smile, Mao suit. April last year, glasses, smile, Western suit. Move to the left, another gentleman standing right next to him. If you understand North Korea's ideology as a religion, this is quite something. But it's getting better. I came back in September, saw this. Let's remember that was just opened in April 2012. September 2012 looks like that. May 2013 looks like this. So what has changed? This time it's Kim Jong-il. They changed his coat. That's all they did. So look at the coat. The coat. Coat. Don't ask me what it means. I have no idea. It's or maybe I would have a potential explanation, but you live in Pyongyang and you see all these things and you think about them. Other images of the leaders. For a long, long time, that was how you looked like. You had your Kim Il-sung badge. That's it. April 2012, I saw all of these people obviously were, well, there wasn't a uniform idea of what you're going to wear. This seems to be the standard thing right now. And then, unfortunately, the picture is really bad. In May, I saw a Kim Jong-un badge in the subway of Pyongyang. For obvious reasons, I couldn't take a good picture of that. This is actually what I find most remarkable. This is how slogans looked like in North Korea in the old days, until very recently. Red, white, or white, red, doesn't matter. Don't care about the contents. It's just the form of the slogans, right? Like this. September last year, for the first time, I saw something like that. At that time, I thought, now perhaps they have run out of paint. You never know. Coming back this year in May, I saw about 60 of those. I asked the North Korean, what is that? And he said, well, that's the new style. It's more natural. I said, yeah, I like it. Now, what does that mean? Here's the slogan. You can hardly read it. And here you can read Sangjom, which means shop. I think that's very symbolic. The ideology, propaganda is still there, but it's moving a little further into the background. From a distance of 100 meters, very hard to read, like gray and gray, right? Sometimes slogans are gone. Like here was a propaganda poster, it's gone. You just see Sangjom Sikdang. Here, no propaganda poster anymore. Now, I'm not saying that they are removing all of them. It's just there are more and more occasions where these things are removed. That's all I'm saying. Plastic money. This one is more popular. Actually, you can see it everywhere. You can use it in taxis, in dedicated shops, etc. Recently, I read in a book by a former member of the Bush National Security Advising Team that North Koreans are lining up 30 deep in front of mobile phones for a book published in 2012. I think a correction is due. Of course, that's a public phone in North Korea, but this is how it looks like today. That's what people do. They do not line up in front of public phones, definitely not. That's North Korea. Obviously North Korea. And that's a tablet manufactured in North Korea. God knows with whose support. It's a Samjion with all kinds of useful apps like the collected works of Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il. But it's there and people can use it and you can even buy it. So next time, September, I'm going again, I will bring you one. You now can bring your mobile phones into the country, which means that in Kaesong, in front of the Kim Il-sung statue, we had access to South Korean mobile phone networks and kept receiving text messages from around the world. And our minders, they wouldn't mind. It's not that they don't know, they don't care. I wouldn't call that a new attitude, but it's definitely more relaxed. How do North Koreans react to all these things? First time I've seen somebody with blue jeans, never seen that before. And it's in the countryside. It's getting better. I even had a chance to talk to that young man. Asked him, how old are you? He's 16 years old. Obviously very small. He's one of that generation that is stunted because of the crisis of 1997. But the point is that they were ready to talk to me. Usually they would run away. They wouldn't really want to engage with a foreigner. Yeah, that's in Pyongyang. Somebody jogging with a base cap. People with pet dogs. People with dyed hair. Can't really see that very nicely, but anyhow, that's not the typical female hairstyle that Kim Jong-il would have emphasized. Clearly, the style of the first lady, Comrade Lee Song-ju, I think, yeah. People spend money for fun, increasingly, not for survival. And here we are not talking about the top elite that Ambassador Davies referred to. We talk about a middle class that, according to my estimates, is about 2 million. So that's an increasingly large group. I'm not saying that this is what every North Korean does. Oh my God, no. Contrast in that country is growing, growing, growing. And we can only imagine what the reaction of the people is, those who do not have access to that kind of stuff. But in the past, you wouldn't see that. In the past, you would have a top elite of 10,000 people. You would perhaps know that they exist, but that's all. But these people mingle with ordinary people. And ordinary people see all that and think, I want that too. A couple having a meal in a local restaurant. When they left half of the food on their plates, meat, etc. So there are people who are doing well. And again, this is not the top elite. May 1st, Labor Day in North Korea, people hanging out in the Changwangsan Hotel in a spa. paying in US dollars, middle class in North Korea. That's what we are talking about. Taxis. Obviously, there are people who are able to afford a taxi. And now you've redefined lots of taxis in Pyongyang. When I was a student there in 1991, it was enormously difficult to get a taxi. They had to be ordered through some special office. It would not like waving over a cab or something. Now you can do that. Solar panels, especially in the countryside, you see many of those. Fruits like bananas on sale. This is one that I really liked. It's a souvenir shop, right? And here they say, happy news, new refrigerators have arrived. Which means that who brings a fridge as a souvenir? That means that they obviously got a license as a souvenir shop, but they are going beyond that. I've been told that I'm running out of time, so let me just browse through those pictures, basically speaking for themselves. This is more poverty, right? You see these things too. People selling cigarettes, obviously knowing that they might not legally be allowed to do so. That's how it looks in the countryside, but the point is that you have commercial activities everywhere. Mobile phones in the countryside as well. Rollerblading in the countryside. People living lives. Again, 20 years ago, impossible. And this is not a model farm. This is just something we drove by. We haven't been brought there. Actually, if you go to Cheongsan-ri, which is one of the spots that they lead tourists to, this looks much better. Yes, we're done.
Thank you.
That's the question. What will these kids do with the future of North Korea once they grow up, 10 years from now? So perhaps this is what I should leave you with, and thank you for your patience.
Yeah, we can all go up there. Ellen, you're up next. Yeah. You want to speak from the podium or from the chair? From the chair. From the chair, okay.
Where are you going to sit?
Let me sit here at post.
Okay.
Yeah, be a little bit easier to do the
You
moderating.
want to sit here?
Yeah, that'd be fine. Thank you.
Okay, then I'm going to sit here. That's okay.
That's great.
Is this microphone? Yes.
It's hot.
It's on, right? Well, first of all, thank you all for coming, and thanks to the sponsors for obviously what is a very important event. Given that we have, I was told actually 5 minutes, so the 2 minutes grace period is exceptional, I will just jump into it. I'm going to talk about China a little bit and the leadership changes and changes in policy, if you will. I want to make sort of bottom line 2 basic points about Chinese policy with respect to North Korea. One is that there have been in recent months some important changes in Chinese behavior, if you will, in willingness to speak out, willingness to impose sanctions. Glyn Davies talked about this a bit ago. And these are important. We also see some greater willingness on the part of China to seem to consult more, make better common cause, if you will, with not just the United States, but others as well. At the same time, I think that there are a lot of basic strategic issues for China which have not changed really at all. Basically, I think that China still remains concerned about eventual unification of Korea under essentially South Korean leadership allied to the United States, and the implications that would have for China's national security interests. That isn't to say that will never change, but I think it remains a guiding point for them at this stage. Historically, I think and go back to the point that our moderator made earlier, that people matter and national interest matters. And in the case of China, clearly they're no different from anybody else. Those are both 2 critical factors. I think it's a little hard to say at this early stage whether the change in leadership in China from the Hu Jintao era to a Xi Jinping era is going to make a dramatic difference simply because of that change, or not. I would tend to say that the style is considerably different. We see what appears to be a much more open way of dealing with people, with issues, public presentation. But I think that China is still driven largely by a whole host of considerations which have not changed. I would also say that while it is what happened, let me put it this way, what happened at Sunnylands was encouraging and positive, particularly both the emphasis on denuclearization and on working with the US and others to try to bring about denuclearization, obviously over time. That goal is not new by any means, and it's not new as a principal Chinese goal. I recall vividly at the time of North Korea's first nuclear test, speaking with a senior Chinese official who was concerned about what President George W. Bush had said in the wake of that test, which was to focus on the proliferation aspect as opposed to saying really anything about North Korea's own program. And this official made very clear that China will never accept a nuclearized North Korea. There are a whole lot of reasons for that, having to do with China's own national security interests, with proliferation both in the region and more generally. But in any case, I think it is a long-standing, high priority concern. I think a lot of us over time have tended to say, well, we had that concern, but if you ordered concerns, we probably put that a little higher, and China would put stabilization of North Korea a little bit higher, but we both sort of wanted to maintain peace, stability, and achieve the denuclearization goal at the same time. I'm not sure that I would argue today that China has, in a certain sense, changed that priority. That is to say, I do not yet see, and I'm not expecting to see, China move in a direction which would put so much pressure on North Korea that it would actually knowingly risk stability in North Korea. I think it's willing to put a lot of pressure on North Korea that it certainly was not willing to do in an open sense before. We've seen the banking sanctions and so on and so forth. But as I said, in a fundamental strategic sense, I don't see that change. There's also one other element that I think one has to think about in terms of the Sunnyland Summit. If you go back before 2010, cooperation on North Korea was, as I have put it in various ways, a poster child of US-China cooperation on North Korea. And then after the events of 2010, the Cheonan and Yeonpyeong-do and so on, we sort of fell out of sync. And I think there is a determination in China today that fits very well with its rising concern about North Korea's policies, its nuclear policy, its bellicose behavior, and so on and so forth, to once again seek to make North Korea cooperation an element, a positive element, perhaps not quite to poster child status, but in that direction with the United States. And I think that was a purposeful effort that was made in Sunnylands and that I would expect to see to continue. So as I say, I think the developments are important. I think we've seen some moderation of North Korean behavior in the most recent period from the spring. And I would credit China with some of that. But we know China has also put pressure on North Korea in the past. In late 2010, when it looked like North Korea might respond to a South Korean resumed military exercise after the Yeonpyeong-do incident, I think China made pretty clear to Pyongyang that that would be a really bad idea. So I think China has taken responsibility for this kind of thing in the past. We'll just have to see as we move forward whether that's going to continue and intensify. Why don't I just stop there, Don?
Well, you got your own timing device, huh? Good for you, Dr. Park.
Well, the other thing I guess I would say is that in terms of people, Xi Jinping has been around in the leadership for some time now. And as I said, he's got a different style, quite obviously, from Hu Jintao. But this is not a leader who is inexperienced in dealing with the North Korean issue. And so I don't think that, again, there's any reason to expect, unless North Korea dramatically changes its behavior, that we're going to see a fundamental shift simply because President Xi is now president as well as general secretary, as opposed to having been number 2. At the same time, it matters. Being number 2 is not being number 1, and we'll simply have to see over time. I'm going to leave.
Thank you. Dr. Park?
Good morning. I'm Inhee Park, teaching at the Ewha Women's University. This is my great honor. I deeply appreciate to everyone carefully organized conference from the both sides, Wilson and the Gyeongnam University. Well, I'm briefly, mainly because of the time constraint, let me briefly introduce the meaning of the trust building process on the Korean Peninsula and what is the key principle to implement for the future success of the trust building process on the Korean Peninsula led by the President Park Geun-hye. Not only because in the last presidential election, not only because of the majority vote after the Korea's democratization in 1978, but also the first female university and also daughter of the previous famous authoritarian leader Park Chung-hee. In particular, she is one of the, maybe the only leader who met personally the former leader of North Korea, Kim Jong-il. And she also having a very meaningful personal network with many of the international leaders, international community. So not only the Korean public but also international community very carefully watching her future North Korea policy and normally known as the trust building process on the Korean Peninsula. In particular, her article published in 2011 in the Foreign Affairs in the leading journals in international relations. Under the title of the trust building process became popular both in among the South Korean people, also in international community. Well, obviously having the similar name from the West Germany's Ostpolitik toward the East German to establish a peaceful relation between the two Germanys. There are still a lot of the debatable issues and unclear meanings regarding the trust building process on the Korean Peninsula. Well, literally speaking, trust building is kind of the combining two different words, trust and the process. Thinking about the past 2 decades inter-Korean relations after the end of the Cold War, according to President Park Geun-hye's understanding, why we have a kind of the so-called vicious circle between North and South Korea, but also between North Korea and the international community. Agreed a lot of things such as September 19th declaration and February 13th joint declaration between U.S. and the North Korea, and also a lot of the meaningful institutional agreement between North Korea and South Korea. But fundamental development of the inter-Korean relation never achieved. Why? According to her understanding, according to my interpretation, not because of the lack of the political leaders' commitment, such as former President Kim Dae-jung, not because of the absence of the general public support to achieve better relations between North and South Korea, not because of the lack of the legal settings or institutional agreement, but because of the lack of the trust. The fundamental development between North and South Korea never achieved. That's why she would like to apply the concept of the trust in her, the North Korea policy under the name of the trust building process on the Korean Peninsula. And the second term of the name of the policy process, according to her understanding, again, a specific occasional happenings or specific agreement or specific interest never achieved fundamental development of the inter-Korean relationship. Instead, according to her terminology, step-by-step oriented accumulation of the trust between North and South Korea, it is kind of the most fundamental factor to achieve a real sense of the inter-Korean development. That is the fundamental concept of under the name of the trust building process on the Korean Peninsula. And to achieve or to implement the specific policy regarding trust building process on the Korean Peninsula, she specifically mentioned about, Park Geun-hye administration specifically mentioned about the importance of so-called alignment policy, which is one of the keyword in her article on the Foreign Affairs 2 years ago. Under the name of the alignment policy, similar meaning of the wheel alignment to drive a car. We have a very carefully organized wheel alignment. Simply speaking, similar to the case of the South Korea's Park Geun-hye administration's policy towards North Korea. Alignment between security and reconciliation between North and South Korea. Alignment between those South Korean-centric approaches to handle North Korean issue, and also international cooperation approaches to handle North Korean issue, most typically including U.S. and ROK alliance. So again, according to my interpretation, personal interpretation, she understands that previous sunshine policy, for instance, only focused on, relatively speaking, the North and South Korean-centric approaches to handle North Korean issue. Relatively speaking, in case of the previous Lee Myung-bak administration's North Korea policy, relatively speaking, instead of the North and South Korea-centric approaches, U.S. ROK alliance-based international cooperation approaches. So, without having a well-balanced position between the two, and also without having a well-balanced position between a strong deterrence against North Korea and also reconciliation between the two Koreas in terms of economic, social, and cultural issues, a meaningful achievement in terms of the trust building will not achieve. That is why she, whenever she has a chance, so often focused on the key principle of the alignment policy. And lastly, whenever I have a chance to introduce the meaning of the trust building process on the Korean Peninsula, and obviously based on my personal interpretation, whenever I have a chance to introduce current Park Geun-hye administration's, the North Korea policy and so-called trust politics as a general foreign policy, I have two most popular questions. The first question coming from the relatively speaking conservative side. Second question, relatively speaking from the liberal side. But the first question from the conservative side, applying the sense of trust against North Korea is kind of, the evil is possible. Well, it's easier speaking, relatively speaking, since here the term of the trust has nothing to do with the, the trust within our daily life, based on a full consideration about security uniqueness, security consideration on the Korean Peninsula. I would say that it's kind of enforcing trust, or trust, a strategic, enforcing trust. So whenever North Korea participate certain type of the discussion or dialogue, they may not retreat or cancel the previous agreement or legal statement, etc.
I'll have to put a
Okay,
period to your sentence there.
Okay, the second question, let me read within 2 minutes. The second question from the liberal side, what's the meaning?
I don't, we want to move this along, and so we're going to have questions, but.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
That's my job, otherwise, Okay.
So the next round discussion session, I will
That's
explain.
right. Bring it up in your
Yes.
next round. That's
Okay.
correct.
Thank you very much.
Scott?
Okay, well, I'm glad that Inhui talked about trust politik, because I really want to talk more about the Northeast Asia Peace and Cooperation Initiative that Park Geun-hye has put forward. And I think that one of the things that is notable about it, we've seen all of the new leaders have their own concepts with regard to regional cooperation, or their own concepts that they've put out. I actually think at this stage that this Northeast Asia Peace and Cooperation Initiative is the most mutually positive among them. We have Abe with his security diamond that maybe Nishino-san will talk more about. Xi Jinping talked more about new model for great power relations, primarily so far as what I've heard. But I think that Park has put forward a vision that truly desires cooperation, and she's identified several problems in the region that need to be addressed. There are three in this particular initiative that she has focused on. One is the need for positive China-U.S. relations in order to avoid an arms race in the region. A second is the need for, as she puts it, a need for a correct understanding of history in the region. And we all know that when she says that, she's talking about Japan. And the third one is about the improvement of inter-Korean relations. And the trust politique idea is really central to implementation of a lot of that because it's really about confidence building. But what I think is interesting is she's put forward this vision. The problem is how in the world is this going to be implemented given the levels of distrust and given the heightened challenges on the security front in the region. Because I think for the first time you've actually got two major challenges in Northeast Asia. One is, of course, North Korea, but the other is the Japan-China relationship and the Senkakus. And that's actually a piece of the puzzle that I think that Park Geun-hye has not really addressed in this Northeast Asia Peace and Cooperation Initiative. Now, how is she doing so far in implementation? Well, we saw her here in Washington last month, and she had a chance to talk about that concept with President Obama. I thought it was very interesting that she tried to suggest there might be some synergy between her initiative and the Obama rebalance. How that would look in practice, I think, is very difficult to actually forge in practical terms. Also, I think that in practical terms, the South Korean government and diplomats are having a very hard time trying to figure out tangible things that they can do to forward this initiative in ways that will promote regional cooperation. So that's a challenge. Madam Park's next stop, as everybody knows, is Beijing, and I anticipate that that set of meetings at the end of this month is going to go very well, and that also I think will be positive for her as she tries to pursue this regional cooperation approach. One of the interesting things I think about this Northeast Asia Peace and Cooperation Initiative is that historically South Korean presidents have been interested in regionalism, but often for different reasons. And so we had progressives, Kim Dae-jung and Roh Moo-hyun, who had their own Northeast Asia regional cooperation proposals based on liberal ideas of cooperation. In some ways it might seem odd that a conservative is focusing so much on regional cooperation, but I think that for South Korea, promoting regional cooperation is actually very realist as an approach, because Korea is damaged by this rising set of tensions. Now, I think the area where there are two areas that obviously require a lot of work, and so I'll just mention them and then stop. The first one is obviously the Korea-Japan relationship and the idea of whether or not this, whether it's going to be possible to deal with history in a very good way. And I think that one of the dangers that we see so far in implementation of the Park foreign policy has been the possibility that inadvertently the Korean government could actually feed into a sense of zero-sum competition between China and Japan. And so I've seen some articles, for instance, in the Korean media talking about the fact that she's going to China first instead of Japan. Okay, that's not necessarily a big problem in my view. The bigger problem is going to be that South Korea, in fact, still has a lot of reasons to cooperate with Japan even while trying to deal with this set of history issues. And we've seen that, but I just focus on that as one aspect of the challenge. And then I'm just going to conclude with a word on the inter-Korean relationship, where obviously there are huge challenges as we talk about the challenge of implementing trust politique or building a positive relationship with North Korea into a vision for regional cooperation. And we've seen the breakdown in talks over the course of the past week. And I think that I just want to make 2 points. One, I thought it was very interesting that on the North Korean side, as we began this discussion about preparation for talks, North Korea raised several of the past agreements, 1972 agreement and the 2 summit agreements, but they left out the 1991 agreement. I think that's particularly interesting because as I think about trust politique and the idea of confidence building measures, it's actually the basic agreement that provides the most fully formed roadmap for progress between the two Koreas in that area. And then I think the second big challenge that we see is we all know that President Park is a strong adherent to a principled approach. And that's very important, I think, for South Korea to pursue that approach. But the other, I think, sticking point that I see in terms of the interaction is that North Korea and Kim Jong-un have got themselves into a very difficult situation, and basically they're probably the only way to climb down out of this situation is to lose face. And yet there's nothing more important in North Korea than face. And so I think one of the real tricks and challenges right at this stage is to figure out where the escape hatch is in terms of moving forward on some of these issues in the inter-Korean relationship in a way that preserves South Korean pride but also preserves North Korean face. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Scott. Dr. Nishino?
Thank you, President Manzuro, and I also thank the Wilson Center and Kyunam University for inviting me today. I'd like to point out three things on the relationship between Japan and two Koreas in the 7 minutes. First, on Japan's policy toward North Korea. Generally speaking, we can see the continuity in Japan's policy toward North Korea because of the abduction issue and Pyongyang's continuous provocative actions. Japan has been taking a firm position by imposing economic sanctions on North Korea over 10 years under each administration. But there's a growing perception in Japanese public opinion that the sanction has not worked effectively than we expected, and that the dialogue with Pyongyang, especially at high level, is necessary for solving this issue. And Prime Minister Abe is really eager to make progress in this issue. So this is why Prime Minister Abe sent his advisor Iijima to Pyongyang. But timing was not good because President Obama and President Park presented the United Front against Pyongyang in Washington a week before Iijima's visit. So fortunately, Japan is now getting the cross cooperation among the US, Japan, ROK back on track. Three countries hold a defense minister meeting at Shangri-La Dialogue last week in Singapore. Second, on Japan-South Korea relations, Prime Minister Abe has tried to maintain ties with South Korea. He dispatched his envoy Nukaga to President-elect Park in January, and also sent Deputy Prime Minister Taro Aso to the inauguration ceremony of President Park in February. Aso had a meeting with President Park just after the inauguration ceremony. But Abe has yet to give a prescription for mending tie with Seoul. Seoul wants Tokyo to take positive action, especially in addressing the comfort women issue, because 2 years ago, South Korea's constitutional court ordered the South Korean government to enter negotiations with Japan on compensating former comfort women. But Tokyo has responded by saying that the issue has already been settled in 1965 basic agreement. So now both sides have to find a way to compromise on this issue. I think Prime Minister Abe has now understood that this issue is really sensitive and must be addressed very cautiously, not only in bilateral ties with Seoul, but also in relation with the international community, especially after the strong backlash against inappropriate remarks by the leader of Japan's opposition party on this issue. So last month, Prime Minister Abe said his administration upholds Kono's statement and Murayama's statement. So I hope that President Park take note of this fact, and Tokyo and Seoul hold a high-level dialogue as soon as possible. Finally, I want to emphasize that the rise of China has given a big impact on the relationship between Japan and Seoul. So given the Chinese expanding military activity in the region, especially along the Senkaku Island, Abe cabinet has pursued to build up a defense posture in southern part of Japan, and to strengthen the U.S.-Japan alliance. So Prime Minister Abe visited Washington in February to make more stronger alliance with the United States. Abe has tried to mend ties with China. He sent his coalition partner, new Komeito party leader Natsuo Yamaguchi, to Beijing in January. But Beijing has been taking the strong position about Senkaku Island under the new president, Xi Jinping. Meanwhile, Abe is developing his diplomacy for strengthening an international order based on the value of freedom, democracy, and the rule of law. He visited Southeast Asia, the United States, Mongolia, Russia, and the Middle East since he took office. And some observers have viewed this action as a policy of encircling China. So it will take time to ease the tension between Tokyo and Beijing. In contrast, President Park had success so far in making good relations with Xi Jinping. As they mentioned, Xi will make a state visit to Beijing this month. So President Park is proactively trying to develop the relationship with China, mainly because she recognized that the cross cooperation with China is indispensable in dealing with North Korea. For President Park, it must be difficult to improve relationship with Japan without reducing the tension between Japan and China. I'll stop it. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I've got some questions I'd like to ask you, and then we'll open it up to the press. First one I'm going to ask is Professor Frank. I was reading an article in the Deutsche Welle just after you returned from another trip to North Korea, your last trip. And in it you mentioned that the DPRK has to convince Beijing that it does not intend to provoke a military conflict on the Korean Peninsula. A couple of questions here. How can North Korea convince Beijing that when North Korea has continued to engage in bellicose language, conduct nuclear missile tests, shelling the island, sinking the Shannon? After each instance, China calls for stability on the Korean Peninsula, urges all parties to keep calm and exercise restraint, etc., yet nothing seems to change. Reuters reported earlier this month that China tried to convince North Korea to give up nuclear missile tests, but Reuters source said that North Korea has not mellowed. What can be done, Professor?
Well, my understanding of North Korea's position towards China is that they are really worried about China. They're worried about the presence of such a big neighbor. I think that it's very obvious if you understand a bit about North Korea's self-perception and the rest of the world. It makes little sense to assume that China is per se a good friend. It's a big power. It's a neighbor of North Korea. It's a country that has the potential to influence North Korea very strongly, so therefore the North Korean government is very careful regarding China, and their policy has always been to try to create kind of a cordon sanitaire between themselves. And with those actions that very obviously go against the will of China, North Korea is kind of making a statement saying, we might depend on you economically to a certain degree, and of course you're big and powerful, but you know, we are not doing whatever you want because we are independent. So it's kind of a show of force. What can the Chinese do? Well, I think their options are, in fact, quite limited, given that they have interests that go beyond North Korea. And that's part of the tragedy of that whole Korea issue, that we talk about North Korea, but the actual problem is China-US relation in that region. This is, I think, really at the core of everything. And this is why North Korea is actually getting so much international attention. Not for North Korea itself. Perhaps now, thanks to the nuclear issue, a little bit. But in essence, it's about China and how do we operate with that country. And the North Koreans know that. I think they went a little bit too far, as we've seen from China's participation in the UN Security Council resolution. The North Korean reaction, very interesting. I got a feedback from a North Korean on my trip saying the Chinese have betrayed us. And if a North Korean says something like this to a foreigner, it really means something. It means that this is obviously now the official opinion within that country. I don't really think it will last forever. The North Koreans are really working very hard to restore that relationship to a point where it had been. That is where there is kind of an uneasy alliance between those two. I think Kim Jong-un and his leadership, they found that perhaps they pushed China a little bit too far. They understand that inside of China things are developing, so China is not the same as it used to be 10 years ago. So they would certainly have to adjust their policies. I don't think that North Korea can really convince China to accept it as it is, but they will nevertheless try to do that, and they won't give it up.
Okay. Let me just ask you a quick follow-up on that. China is amassing all types of huge assets at the border, 2 or 3 different types of high-speed rail, one going to port city just above Rason. North Korea has about $13 trillion worth of minerals. And some have said that the reason that China is being so friendly towards North Korea is the fact that they're really interested in essentially colonizing the country unofficially, obviously, not politically, in that they're supplying most of the energy, a good part of the food, and eventually will be supplying a lot more jobs. Now, do you feel, based upon your experiences and your slide presentation, which was excellent, tell us about that. What do you feel about that?
I mean, if you look at the economy of North Korea right now, it's very obvious China is all over the place. If you go to those trade fairs, 80–90% of companies that present stuff there are from China. If you look at products that look good, usually they are produced by a joint venture, where the joint venture partner is very obviously China. Gas stations are operated by the Chinese, etc. China is the great role model for the North Koreans in terms of how to learn to do business. Doesn't mean that they are good friends, but they are really a Western economic power that North Koreans have everyday contact with, which, by the way, is a huge difference if you compare that to, for example, East Germany before unification. Their main partner was another failed socialist country, Soviet Union. In the case of North Korea, it's different. So the relationship is there. It is. I wouldn't say it's characterized by friendship. It's characterized by interests. Of course, the Chinese are interested in North Korea's natural resources. I would not personally overemphasize that fact. I think it's part of China's global strategy of having access to all those resources. The North Koreans, as you know, are not very happy about that. We have that famous case of the Chinese company that faced all kinds of difficulties with the North Korean government because nobody wants to be colonized. And I mean, there are many Koreans here. I don't have to tell you the Koreans are very sensitive to an economic domination that perhaps precedes a political domination. We had that already 100 years ago. We certainly don't want to see a repetition of that. China, on the other hand, is very actively trying to convince North Korea that their way is better. My favorite example is the cultural center in the city of Tumen, which perhaps none of you has ever visited. It's really a dirty town on the Chinese Rust Belt in the northeast, right at the border to North Korea. Development hasn't reached that city yet. It's not shiny like Shanghai, etc. But they have one thing that looks really good. It's a cultural center out of tropical woods and glass and concrete and steel. It's fantastic. And it's built in a kind of a half circle right at the river facing North Korea. I mean, that couldn't be more obvious. It's like, look what we've got. think why we got it and try to do the same thing. So it's not megaphone diplomacy, it's more subtle, but actually it's quite obvious.
Thank you. Alan, I've got a question. It's similar to the second question that I asked Professor Frank, and it's really important. Going back to that Wall Street Journal article, again, that earlier this month, there's a quote in there. It says, quote, "The Chinese are clearly sending messages to North Korea They've been putting up less of a fight on North Korea's behalf, but the preference still is to do big-ticket economic cooperation, and that's quoting John Delury, an expert on China and North Korea at Yonsei University in Seoul. And from an American government point of view, that's in contradiction to the so-called main strategy. Give us your thoughts on that.
Well, I agree very much with what Rudiger Frank just said. I think that economics matters, and obviously a lot of Chinese are involved in North Korea to make money. But I also think China looks at its relationship with North Korea not only to take advantage, but also to create leverage. And we'll see over time how much they succeed in this. I want to go back to the point about the sort of political relationship, if you will, between China and North Korea. I think the sense of discomfort, mutual suspicion, even disdain, mutual disdain, goes back a long time. This is not new. I mean, I've actually been sort of looking at that relationship probably about 20 years, and my introduction was in talking both to North Koreans and to Chinese, and separately, obviously. And it was very clear. And I don't think that's changed, but they need each other. They have an interest. It's not the same interest, but I think that China, particularly with the collapse of the Soviet Union, became a pillar of survival, if you will, in many respects. But I think, as I said before, China looks at North Korea as I didn't use the term, but a buffer. They still look at this strategic situation where, again, the United States is an important issue for China in the region, and I think that they see the continued stability and existence of North Korea as best they can help make it that way as a buffer against whatever threat they may perceive or potential threat they may perceive from U.S. strategic.
And China is the largest trading partner with both North and South Korea.
Well, and obviously the
So it's a forced kiss.
The relationship with South Korea is multiples of the relationship with North Korea, and one could argue that therefore China might sort of drift in that direction. I think for strategic reasons and others, China is going to continue to be supportive of North Korea, but to use that supportive relationship to try to get North Korea not to engage in provocative behavior, not to try and create problems in the region, be it political proliferation, whatever it might be. The course of Chinese policy is going to be importantly determined by how North Korea, in the end, acts.
Okay, thank you.
Maybe if I could just say one more thing. I think one of the greatest achievements of US foreign policy in that region of the past decade or so is to make everybody believe that North Korea and China are close friends and allies, which is not necessarily true, but it associates China as some kind of responsibility for North Korea's behavior, and that's really brilliant, and it works.
Okay, well that's a good segue to a question to Dr. Park. Dr. Park, you talked about new initiatives that Korea's new president, Madam Park, is making towards North Korea. But how can trust be built when North Korea breaks every agreement? I mean,
Yes, one of the most, the popular criticism regarding the trust building process is that, even South Korea's continuation of the, approaches to establish a kind of the trust, what happens, North Korea continuously deny or, continues try to make another provocation and etc. Well, let me answer indirectly. Theoretically speaking, in South Korea we have every 5 years president election. In the United States, every 4 years president election. Literally, theoretically speaking, every 20 years, two presidents, two leaderships, that begin simultaneously. Interestingly enough, immediately after the end of the Cold War, in the United States, you had a Clinton administration. In South Korea, Kim Young-sam administration. Exactly after 20 years, we have a second administration of President Obama, and we have a Park Geun-hye administration. According to Park Geun-hye's still, way of her understanding regarding importance of trust to apply her North Korea policy is that, ironically enough, interestingly enough, for the past 20 years, South Korea, very interestingly, experienced two conservative presidents, and for 10 years, another, the equally two liberal, progressive president, another 10 years. So, in terms of the policy options shown, we tried all the different options to make a better relations between the two Koreas. But again, as I mentioned before, vicious circle, either sunshine-like engagement policy towards North Korea, or any so-called principle-based North Korean policy, which is from the conservative side. Both two different approaches eventually failed to change North Korea. So the only option after 20 years experience of the inter-Korean relations in the post-Cold War period, according to Park Geun-hye administration, again based on my personal interpretation, the most fundamental sense of the trust, which is the final resort to establish better relations between two Koreas. Well, I think even North Korea respond to South Korean government making another provocation. I don't think Park Geun-hye administration will give up. One of the typical examples so far is a negotiation process regarding the Kaesong Industrial Complex. Well, currently the South Korean government showed very different gestures or response to North Korean negotiation options and process. So what happens? Well, again, since as the naming saying, is saying the process, I don't understand. I assume she will understand it's kind of the longer part of the process, even though they are making another provocation. But again, her own position of the trust-based approach is just continuously towards North Korea policy.
Okay, let me move on to Scott. Scott, a couple of questions. What does the U.S. rebalance to Asia mean for South Korea? Do you discern any changes with respect to Korea because of the new Secretary of State, Defense, and Treasury here in the United States? Good political question.
I think that in a way the North Koreans have frozen the rebalance as it relates to Korea, and have actually helped to provide a basis for giving reassurance to South Korea that whatever happens on the rebalance, basically the U.S. commitments are strong. Ash Carter just, I think, earlier this week essentially bracketed the Korean Peninsula as relates to sequestration. So, it's set aside. And we'll have to see, frankly, we'll have to see how the rebalance is carried out in the second term.
Okay.
I mean, I think that it's not necessarily completely clear who's going to really be the driving force at this stage here, and so I think that will probably have an impact as well.
Professor Nishino, in an article in the Asahi Shimbun that just appeared, you stated that, quote, what Japan and South Korea need between them now are networks of interaction and dialogue between politics that provide opportunities to solve problems rather than interaction or dialogue that soon breaks down when a problem arises, end of quote. Can you give us a real-life example of what type of dialogues will result in something substantial happening?
You mean between South Korea and Japan?
Yes. No, I'm sorry, between Japan and South Korea. I quoted you in your article, so but you were talking about the quality of the talks between South Korea and Japan. And I just wanted to follow up on that. For example, interparliamentary exchanges taken between the two countries. What level or what nature of dialogue will bring Japan and South Korea to the point where they can resolve these issues?
So actually, under the during the Namjoon administration in 2003 or 4, we, Japan and South Korea, agreed to launch a so-called shuttle diplomacy between South Korean president and Japanese prime minister. But this installed immediately because the President Nam-hyun really angry at the Japanese prime minister Koizumi's visit to Yasukuni Shrine. But we really want a high-level dialogue with South Korea to keep a good relation. Especially now, we need from Japanese perspective. We need information sharing with South Korea to deal with North Korean nuclear issue. And actually, we were supposed to sign the intelligence sharing agreement last June, but because of flailing domestic public opinion, we couldn't do that. So the problem is despite the growing exchange between Japan and South Korea in citizen level, actually every year we exchange 5.5 million people. So decreasing the interaction or exchange at the political level make the relationship difficult. So now we needed to restore the trust at the political level.
Thank you, appreciate that. Okay, we open the floor now to people with questions, and she has the microphone back there and a microphone over here. Who has the second? Oh, usually you say the second question because no one has the first question. But go ahead. Right here? Yes, sir.
I always have the first question. I can't help it.
All right.
It's Chris Nelson with his habitual first question. For Rudy Frank, it's so interesting to see the pictures and to be reminded that there is actual life in Pyongyang and a real middle class. But it's so hard for us to understand what are we seeing? Are we seeing potentially the preconditions for our revolution of rising expectations? The people are starting to get more and more what everybody recognizes as a middle class life. And we know historically that there are certain imperatives that are associated with that. The more you get, the more you want, and you want a better delivery and all the other things that we hope to see. Is it premature to be thinking about that possibility in North Korea, perhaps being led by these non-elite Pyongyang middle class people?
I think it's actually a high time that we finally start thinking about that. These processes, they haven't been started under Kim Jong-un. They've been going on for a long time, obviously kick-started by a certain necessity that arose during the arduous march or the famine in the late 1990s. Most visibly, of course, kick-started by those July measures in 2002. And ever since, that stuff has been going on. And myself, having been born and raised in East Germany and in the Soviet Union, I pretty much know how that works. So once it's started, you can't stop it. You cannot predict when it will lead to a change, but I think we are on that track, and there are basically two ways out for North Korea. One is collapse. That would be the East German solution or the Eastern European solution. The other would be perhaps a Chinese way, that is maintain the stability of political system while you reform your economy. And that's why I'm so optimistic and confident in the long run. In the short run, we see all those ups and downs that are like a silly dance that we've all seen before. Now, regarding the actual domestic effects and pressures of that, I find it slightly interesting that everybody is so negative about the promotion of Pyongyang. I think it's actually quite smart, because what the North Korean government does in obviously channeling all the resources into Pyongyang, renovating the city and having all those fun fairs opened and new buildings and everything, they create their own Shangri-La within North Korea, which everybody else can look up to. So when we, as young people in East Germany, were dreaming of a better life, we were not thinking particularly about East Berlin. We were thinking about whatever, New York or Paris or London. If a young lad somewhere in the countryside of North Korea thinks about a better life, of course lacking other options, he thinks, how cool would it be to go to Pyongyang and live there? Which is kind of smart, because you maintain, all those desires. They are focused on something within your country. So the question remains, what about people who are already there? in Pyongyang? What do they want to do? And that's the big question. And this is why I fully agree. This middle class, as we might call it, is really the one decisive factor. They are in Pyongyang already. They are enjoying all those privileges that we have seen. And as you also said, and I couldn't agree more, one thing that everybody in the world wants is more. More of, whatever you got.
More is better. Yes.
Definitely. If you got a car, you will never be happy. This is what socialist planners never managed to understand. They thought if people have a car, what's the problem? No, they want a better car. And if they get a better car, they want another car. And perhaps later they want a house for their better car. And got no idea. So this is unstoppable. And the North Korean society so far is not made for that. This is our game. Our society is built to, basically built on the very desire of people to always want more. The North Korean society isn't yet. And the big challenge for Kim Jong-un is first to understand that. I personally believe he has. And second, to find a way to react to that without screwing up his system.
Yeah.
And this is a big challenge.
Who has the next question? Let's see, right back here.
My name is Alex Forster. I'm with the U.S.-Japan-South Korea Legislative Exchange Program at George Washington University. My question is, I guess, the recent provocations from North Korea have been sort of concentrated into 1 year, more so than we have seen in the past. How much of that do you think is a reaction to, or because of Kim Jong-un trying to consolidate power? And if it is that, how can any policies of South Korean or Japanese or Chinese leaders actually have much effect on North Korea's relations with them? Or is it just unpredictable and it's up to North Korea to react and interact however it wants to with its neighboring nations?
Who does that question go to?
Whoever.
I'll just lead off with one small comment because this is not an area of my expertise, but I think that the reaction we saw by China in 2010 to protect North Korea from criticism and pressure had a lot to do with concern about the stability of the leadership in North Korea. But at this point, Kim Jong-il had a stroke, and I think there was a lot of consternation about sort of, what was going to happen. So I think to that extent, they did make an effort to try to provide some level of stability. I think that the kinds of things you just referred to within the last year have been very concerning, however, and leave people with a lot of questions about where are the limits and so on. And I think a lot of the efforts recently with General Che coming to Beijing and so on have been designed to try to cope with that.
Let's take another question here. This lady right here in the middle.
Thank you. My name is Jean Nguyen with Voice of Vietnamese Americans. My question has
Put a little bit closer.
my question has two parts. One is the power part. The other one is the economy part, and how we can converge it to build strategic trust. I heard the trust being mentioned, which is a long term, and seems like all leaders in Asia now talking about building trust, even President Xi and President Obama. So that seems to be a long, long vision. So my first question regarding the nuclear power, I heard from Dr. Patrick Cronin from CNAS the other day that North Korea posture.
Make your question short so they can answer. What is the question?
My question regarding the nuclear provocative actions was that is the demanding, is the crying out loud for recognition of power. That's the first question of power. So instead of sanctioning, can you somehow, the UN, the international community, recognize that power somehow? That's the first one. The second one is the economic one. Everybody, including President Park, I think she won the election because she put the emphasis on the economy and the social issues. So recently, the Korea FTA, the chorus, have made a big difference in the US. And so the TPP, now we're hoping Japan will join. So where do you see South Korea, Japan in the RCEPs with that Asia Pacific and the TPP, and where do you see the pictures that we have North Korea in that, in the economic pictures? That goes with the power,
Okay,
the economic, and then the trust.
All right. Who wants to handle that easy one?
I'm not familiar with the trade or economic issue, but let me briefly mention about the first part of the question regarding the nuclear power. Well, there is a very fundamental the nature of the nuclear issue between North Korean case and the other so-called three new nuclear states such as India or Pakistan, Israel. That is, why United States, why South Korea international community, including United States, is so sensitive about North Korean nuclear case instead of the India or Pakistan nuclear case. Part of the theory, theoretically speaking, those countries never member of the NPT, but North Korea used to be member of NPT, so fundamentally undermining the rationale of the NPT, which is the authority of the international community. But you know what the irony? For the last 20 years, even though North Korea continuously increased their nuclear capability or status, but whenever they had a chance, they said that denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula is a lesson or legacy of the former leader Kim Il-sung. It's kind of irony. But interesting enough, because of that fact, so-called in South Korea, I assume similar to American society as well, two debating groups. The first group, North Korean nuclear problem, mainly because as a diplomatic tools or means. If we interpret North Korean nuclear development in terms of the diplomatic means, whether to dismantle North Korean nuclear capability depends on South Korea or United States, theoretically speaking. The second group of the South Korean people understand North Korean nuclear development, eventually they would like to become nuclear state. If we identify in that category, if we identify North Korean nuclear program, eventually they would like to become a nuclear state. Whether to dismantle North Korean nuclear program depends on them, not depends on South Korea or someone else outside North Korea. So, but ironically enough, exactly about 1 year ago, which is April 13, 2012, North Korean government specifically mentioned when they revised their constitution, they are already achieved nuclear status. After April, they never mentioned saying, denuclearization is the legacy or lesson of the Kim Il-sung. So I'm saying that entering second stage of the nuclear problem issue of the North Korea, which is a very critical issue, but again, can I have another 1 minute?
Sure, yep.
Okay. I'm not sure
you came a long way.
I'm not sure whether you agree or not, but quite substantial number of the South Korean policymakers and the people in academia regarding the North Korean issue and U.S.-North Korea relations, we say that you may disagree, but one of the interesting interpretation is that United States very careful about to handle or to solve North Korean nuclear issue. Okay, they are doing their best, but they do not include all the policy options such as military attack. Okay, so according South Koreans, some of the South Korean interpretation, from United States perspective, we understand there is kind of the trade-off. Okay, using all the American policy options to handle North Korean issue, nuclear issue, including military option, and preserving or securing the current stability and economic activity or prosperity in Northeast Asia, which was achieved in particular after end of the Korean War. So it's kind of the trade-off between the two. So I assume that, and some of the liberal side of the South Korean scholars say that such kind of uniqueness of the Northeast Asian security condition carefully examined or carefully interpreted by North Korean policymakers. So they are voraciously in a very negative way. They are making the best use of their strategic calculation of situation, by analyzing similar vein. So again, North Korean or Northeast Asian nuclear state of security is kind of very unique, not from the general understanding or calculation.
Well, thank you very much. This has been a very interesting panel. Great presentations, tremendous questions. I really appreciated that. Let's give the panelists a big round of applause and thank them for coming today. Oh, we have more time? Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. We have about 10 more minutes. I thought that we were out of time. Oh, forgive me. Is that okay with you?
Sure.
Good. Okay. Right over here. Right there.
No more.
Right there. Right there. Yeah, there you are. Okay. Yeah, sorry about that.
I didn't want to be the last question. And my name is Kunio Kikuchi, and I'm with Washington Research and Analysis. My question perhaps is to Professor Nishio and perhaps to Professor Frank also. There are about 250,000 diaspora North Koreans living in Japan. And in terms of providing information about what the outside world is like to North Korea, I would think that these 250,000 North Koreans living in Japan would be a tremendous influence since they're wealthy and everything else. What do you think? Did they stop? Did the Japanese government stop their interaction on the daily or the monthly cruise boat to North Korea? What's the situation today?
Thank you for the question. So as you know now, Japanese government is imposing sanctions on North Korea. Because of this now, North Koreans in Japan restricted to go to North Korea. For example, they can go to North Korea by the ship Mangyongbong-ho or as a planes. But so we can see still we have many exchange between Japan and North Korea in the civil basis. Actually, Japanese government don't want Japanese citizen to go to North Korea, but actually many, not so many, but some Japanese often go to North Korea, and they can bring the information about North Korea. This is the current situation.
I'm talking the other way.
Pardon?
Information about Japan to North Korea.
Japan to North Korea. So now Japanese government operating the radio for Japanese people in North Korea. The name is maybe Shiokaze, as far as I know. But so it's kind of a flow of information is really limited. But now as slide shows, now many North Koreans are using mobile phones, so they can get information from China, and they can get information from South Koreans, especially in the border area between China and North Korea. Maybe they can get information about Japan through this kind of
They mentioned in your article that people don't believe in
mobile phone
propaganda anymore. Go ahead.
Yeah, just very briefly, when I was there in Pyongyang for the first time in '91, all products in hard currency stores were made in Japan. Now, if you want to buy anything anywhere in North Korea, most of the stuff is made in China. So clearly China has replaced Japan as a function of being the main source of information. And all those USB and DVDs, also of South Korean soap operas, they are smuggled in, or brought in, I should perhaps say, via China. So in a way, in terms of information about the outside world, not much has changed. It's just that Japan has completely lost its influence in that regard. The Chinese are now the ones that are educating the North about the outside world, and then leave it up to you to decide whether you're happy with this or not. I do believe, from my conversations with North Koreans and also my analysis, that the North Korean government itself would be pretty happy to have Japan back. not because they love the Japanese so much, but because they need to counterbalance that overwhelming might of China in terms of everything, including information. So I do see a potential there. But of course, and that's why I think it's good that you started talking about the Japanese concerns. I think Japan is the problem. Domestic politics in Japan since September 2002, when everybody thought the abductee issue is resolved, exactly the opposite happened. And I think now if you're a reasonable Japanese politician, you really can't ignore it. You have to insist on the resolution first, and that's basically a non-starter for the North Koreans. And that's why the Mangyongbong, I think, is now used to carry Chinese tourists, right? That ship. I think that's its new purpose.
It seemed to me today, Mike Macetic, that PBS Online NewsHour, that the major theme out of the Glyn Davies presentation was that the countries dealing with North Korea really have to get on the same page. Kurt Campbell was saying that in his last days of office 6 months ago. Hasn't this problem actually gotten worse? I mean, just yesterday, somebody in China was saying, well, let's take back Okinawa because it really belongs to us. That the squabbles are getting more intense among the countries that are dealing with North Korea, which is of benefit basically only to North Korea.
I'll take a first crack at that. I think that the problem between China and Japan is quite significant and perhaps the most, outside of whatever problems North Korea is creating by itself, most serious issue. Scott talked about this a bit. I think between, or among the others, it's actually not bad at this point. I mean, I think that as Scott pointed out, as often happens, North Korea has sort of saved the day. It has consolidated the U.S. commitment on rebalancing. I think it has also seriously affected some aspects of South Korea's own policy toward North Korea, led to greater sense of coordination, cooperation, I would say, among the U.S., South Korea, and China, and certainly also from an American point of view with Japan. And the U.S. continues to work to at least have Japan, Korea, and the United States talking about these issues. And I think we heard Glyn say he's going to try to bring all the five together. So I think that, again, the Sino-Japanese issue is, I think, a quite serious problem diplomatically. I don't expect to see war break out, but I think it's quite serious as a diplomatic one, and I think the Chinese are looking to us and probably looking to South Korea and others to try to affect what is going on in Japan. I think they may have some dreams about this which may not be right. Among other things, we don't share their appraisal of what's going on in Japan. But I don't have the sense of the kind of division that I think you're suggesting, but I don't know, Scott may disagree with that.
Yeah, I just want to make one comment, and that is to hear Glyn talk about the effectiveness of squeezing North Korea, you would think that Rudiger mislabeled his slides, that North Korea should look like 1991 instead of 2012.
Let's take one more question, right here in front.
Hi, my name is Harris Rothman.
Hold it closer to your mouth.
My name is Harris Rothman. I'm an intern at the Council on Foreign Relations in D.C. I was just wondering, I had a question for Professor Park, which was that given that the concern with North Korean nuclear power is really more the fact that it's a hostile and sort of extortionist state with nukes rather than just having a country with nuclear power in the world, is it counterproductive then to actually have the kind of multilateral diplomacy that Ambassador Davies was talking about? Does the fact that the U.S. is so focused on getting rid of the nukes, is that disruptive to the whole trust politique, the fact that we're so obsessed with defanging the DPRK?
Actually, both from the South Korean side and American side, diplomatic relations against North Korea, it has two pillars, fundamentally speaking. One pillar is about denuclearization process. Another pillar is kind of reconciliation or economic assistance or social, normalization project of North Korea. So not only currently, but also looking back the past 20 years, the people who would like to denuclearization should come first. Another group, reconciliation process should come first. It's kind of never-ending debate, and even currently. So, because of the current North Korea's unprecedented, the crisis for the last 1 year, it seems to me that Park Geun-hye's trust politic or American government is obviously, the firstly emphasizing denuclearization process. But one of the interesting, I do agree, okay, I think it's kind of the right on the track. But one of the interesting lessons from the Lee Myung-bak administration, obviously Lee Myung-bak administration approach, achieved a lot of positive consequences regarding North Korea policy, in particular consolidated U.S.-Korea alliance. But one of the negative outcomes of the Lee Myung-bak administration is that, the inter-Korean relations, U.S.-North Korean relations, a lot of different issues. Obviously, denuclearization is critically important, but simultaneously one of them. So if we associate all the issues in terms of denuclearization, inter-Korean development or normalization of North Korea, something never will achieve. So, denuclearization is larger part of the pillar portion, but if there is a sudden strategic moment of their interesting, strategic change of their behavior, from the North Korean side, personally understand a lot of simultaneous steps should be emphasized. So I think it will such kind of the strategic, the engagement moment will come soon.
Well, thank you all for coming. Now let's give them a big hand for participating.
Come on, Bob.
Thank you so much. Very interesting. Thank you. Great.